You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 19th of July, 2024 on Monocle Radio.
A wild week in US politics. The world holds its breath and scratches its head. Monocle Radio packs its portmanteaus for the Olympics, and Ukraine finds ways to keep its sporting traditions alive in the most trying of circumstances. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. It's Friday, so it's our weekly in-house daily, and the Monocle staffers who all chose to hide in the most obvious storage closet were Thomas Lewis, David Stevens, Carlotta Rebello and Julia Lassica. They'll discuss the day's big stories and Monocle's plans for the Olympics, and we'll have live music from Aoife O'Donovan. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I'm joined first of all, and frankly inexplicably, given that neither of them are on until the second item, by Carlotta Rebello and David Stevens. Why have you come in here early? There is literally a nice summer drinks going on in our courtyard.
You look so lonely in here on your own, so we thought we'd keep you company.
Had you not considered the possibility that I might have been quite content, David?
We always consider
But you sat next to me all day. I think you wanted a tiny bit more of me.
You see, listeners, what it is that I do have to deal with. But it is true. We should, I think, give some insight into life here at Midori House. We are literally at this moment conducting a spontaneous cocktail evening.
Yes, a spontaneous, organised cocktail evening to celebrate the fact that summer in mid-July has finally arrived to the United Kingdom.
In front of the degrees. So we're celebrating.
It's a big day.
I think we are all of that cohort here at Midori House who do find the more abject British weather harder to deal with because we do all come from sunnier climes. Carlotta, you from quite a long way south from here, the pleasant, temperate island of Madeira.
Not as quite south as the two of you.
Well, indeed, David and I from a great deal further south. Me from Australia and David from... it's on the tip of my tongue. That other country in broadly that vicinity.
You find a way to put a bit of a Kiwi barb in any time. Yeah, I appreciate it.
You'd be disappointed if I didn't. We will hear more from you both shortly. I have done all I can to avoid such an outcome, but apparently we're stuck with it. But first, this last week has been, even by the demented standards of recent times, quite the wild ride in American politics. The Republican nominee for the presidency, Donald Trump, narrowly survived an assassination attempt and then presided over a party convention which climaxed in an interminable and incomprehensible speech to an audience partially comprised of weirdo cultists who had taped bandages to their right ears in sympathy. On the other side of the aisle, Democrats have been confecting increasingly unsubtle plans to send their faithful old hound to live on a nice farm. With more, Monocle's Toronto correspondent Thomas Lewis joins me now. Thomas, is this all doing wonders for Canada's innate sense of superiority as it regards events south of the border?
I think it is actually, Andrew, and I think, I say this in the nicest possible way, but I think for many years there's been a very gentle, sort of friendly smugness here in Canada in terms of the relationship with the big neighbour to the south that, thank goodness that, particularly over these past few years, as politics has become so volatile there, thank goodness that we're tucked away up north, up here. But I think Canadians have also been watching the last couple of weeks' news, as you described, Andrew, as pretty head-scratching and can't quite believe with, relatively so little time until Election Day in November that so much is in the air, it seems, among both candidates, I'd say.
Thomas, I don't know how much of Donald Trump's oration you stayed awake for last night. I would forgive you that arrant dereliction of journalistic duty if you replied honestly none of it. But there had been this line trailed ahead of it that he was going to present as a changed man, a reflective, rueful even, but unifying figure tempered by his brush with death. Do we get any sense whatsoever that that's what occurred?
Well, as soon as we heard those statements coming from Pennsylvania on Saturday, from both Donald Trump himself, Andrew, and from the Republican Party, that now that the whole tone of the convention would be about unity and this would be an entirely different sort of Donald Trump, I was, I think, among the many people who are pretty sceptical, having covered Donald Trump and Donald Trump's rallies over the years. At moments of major national upheaval, Donald Trump has rarely chosen the path of unity, so it felt like a pretty big order. And I think, from the speech last night, and in the name of honesty, and seeing as you have talked about a nice drinks reception happening there in London, Andrew, I did have a little tipple or two with a friend, and I did catch the end of the speech, which I think, having caught up on bits of it since, he did sort of pick up. It was a kind of a strange tone, as you alluded to. It was almost like he was trying to go off script, like he's so famous for doing in his rallies, where the crowd really sort of join him. But in this big setting of the convention hall, it just kind of landed very differently and seemed much less energetic, I think, than usual. So I think, it's if we are going to look at, say, the Democrats and whatever Joe Biden, the president, decides to do with his own candidacy, I heard some commentary on one of the big US networks a little earlier this morning saying that actually Donald Trump himself has maybe for the first time seemed somewhat frail and somewhat fallible in, having survived an attempt on his life. So unsurprisingly, of course, but given that he is the great fighter in American politics, and for those who adore him still and will no doubt vote for him come November, perhaps it was quite a different sort of tone and different side to their leader that they saw last night. So there are shifts going on all the time, Andrew, as you alluded to at the beginning. And it's really quite extraordinary that this is happening with only, I think, just over 100 days, is it, until Election Day in November.
Well, on the other side of the aisle then, Thomas, there are mixed messages emerging. There are now a not insignificant number of congressional Democrats, even one or two senators, who have said publicly that they believe Biden's time might have come. But we have also heard from his own camp that once out from under COVID-19, he intends to resume campaigning next week. That might not necessarily be untrue, of course. They weren't specific about who he would be campaigning for.
Yes, absolutely. And, I have been watching a lot of American news this morning just to try and keep up with all these different pieces, as you say, Andrew, of reports from inside the Biden camp, reports from senior Democrats. Yesterday, the news cycle was full of a Washington Post report, I think, suggesting that Barack Obama, the former president, and of course, the president to Joe Biden as vice president when they were in office together, stating that concerns over his candidacy. I'd say, the tone of the coverage definitely feels as though there is kind of an inevitability to President Biden leaving his candidacy behind this time around. There are still so many unknowns as to actually how the process would work, and given that the choice kind of has to come from President Biden himself. But it does definitely feel as though, we're hearing reports today, I believe, Andrew, that apparently President Biden himself is a little more open to the possibility of Kamala Harris, the current vice president, taking his place at the top of the ticket, asking, can she win, rather than stating previously it was reported that she just can't win. So things do seem to be moving, and lots of people have their eyes on this weekend. I thought it was interesting this morning too, just briefly, Andrew, that there is talk now, of course, for Joe Biden, that if he does end his candidacy with so little time to go before Election Day, how does that happen in a way that sort of respects the sitting president and also respects a career that has spanned decades? Of course, Joe Biden has been a part of public life in the United States for most of his adult life by this stage. And, it's definitely felt not very edifying for the Democratic Party, I'd say. But I think that there is a tone now of like, how do you show this big leader in American life for so many years, the respect that is warranted in the eyes of his supporters, if he does indeed decide to leave his candidacy this time around and allow someone else to take his place at the top of the ticket. So there are lots of moving parts to this, and it's interesting to see how quickly, Andrew, I think the various tones are shifting around it. So all eyes, I think, are on the next few days, to be honest, to see whether more news comes and whether decisions either way are made.
Thomas, just finally, and while we have you here, we should, of course, talk about the political upheaval which really matters this week. And this is the one that has been erupting in Wales.
Yes, absolutely. Vaughan Gething, leader of the Senedd, the Welsh government, Europe's first black leader of a government in all of Europe, has resigned this week after I think it was 113 days. I'll get lots of angry letters if I get that wrong, but just over 100 days, I believe.
Yeah, that's about 1 1/4 trusses.
Well, exactly, the new measure of all political careers, I'd say, Andrew, probably. So, yes, at least he doesn't get that sort of ominous kind of title. But it's a kind of a shame because, the way having Vaughan Gething as First Minister, he did win the leadership race very narrowly. But I think having him as the leader of the Welsh government, which is a sort of semi-devolved government that controls just certain parts of government policy and life in Wales, really was, I think, something that lots of people right across Wales, across various bits of society were pretty proud of. But I think, unfortunately for him, it was this big donation, £200,000 from a company, the owner of which had been found guilty of breaking lots of environmental laws. And, Wales is a pretty small country, and I think lots of people still are scratching their heads about why you would need £200,000 to run for election, even though, it's a very important, the top of the Labour Party and the First Minister job is an important one, but still, that's sort of astronomical sums. And he couldn't really shake that. And I would say that the Welsh media, Andrew, just briefly, really, had done a lot of work on keeping up the pressure on him, given that it just seemed to sit so awkwardly with kind of the ideals that, the leader of the Welsh, the Senedd, the Welsh Assembly government, was, saying that he would uphold. So, yes, we're into a new chapter yet again. It's widely believed that Jeremy Miles, who came second to Vaughan Gething in that previous leadership race, who only lost, it was 48-51, I think, percent or something like that, between the two, is likely to run again. And he's a very popular figure within the party and is an openly gay politician, and that would also mark a first for politics in Wales. And yes, so looking to the future after a very brief tenure, but I'm sure, the history books will look back at kind of a mess of his own making, but also the fact that he became Wales's first black leader of the Senedd, the Welsh government, I think will be a historic thing that will be a source of pride for lots of people in the years to come, Andrew.
Thomas Lewis in Toronto, thank you for joining us. You are listening to The Daily with me, Andrew Muller, and it is now just 1 week until the Olympic flame is lit, and it can be announced, or if you somehow already knew this, reiterated, that Monocle Radio will be decamping en masse to Paris for the duration. And joining me now to explain what we will be doing once we have unpacked our berets and tiny accordions are Carlotta Rebello, Monocle's senior foreign correspondent, and David Stevens, deputy head of production and producer of The Urbanist. Carlotta, first of all, we're all going to Paris. Are you as yet aware entirely what we're going to do once we get there?
Yes.
How about telling me as well as the listeners?
Yes, you are also going to Paris, Andrew.
I am.
So that's the first item on this agenda. Yes, Monocle Radio is heading to Paris for 2 weeks of special broadcasts. This very show from the 29th onwards for 2 weeks will be coming from Paris, as well as a brand new program that we are creating for the duration of the Olympics, aptly named Monocle in Paris, which is airing from 8 a.m. London time, 9 a.m. Paris time for 1 hour. So
is this going to be better than Emily in Paris?
I mean, Monocle in Paris.
Don't ever do that again.
But yes, let's refocus here. So the two programs will be the staple of our broadcast, as well as Monocle on Saturday and Monocle on Sunday in their existing slots, which is 10 a.m. local time, 9 a.m. in London. And for the duration of the games, of course, as listeners will know, we're not a sports radio station. We are not going to be merely focusing on what's happening in the actual games, but everything that happens around it too. So we are looking at Paris as a host city from the angles of hospitality, culture, design, architecture, soft power, security as well, as we know that has been an item that's been on the news recently about the high security that's needed for Paris. So looking at all the other things that hosting an event of this magnitude brings to town, and also taking advantage of everyone being in town and being able to host these conversations. We will be located at the So Hotel, which will be transformed into Maison Alliance for the duration of the games, and we'll be on the top floor of that with our pop-up radio studio. So hopefully nice views of the river, and we're right next door to the Pavillon de l'Arsenal, which is essentially the city's urbanism museum. So if you see me and David Stevens is appearing for a while, I think you might know what we're doing. We're going to try to make an episode of The Urbanist from there at some point.
Well, to bring in David, and David, on the in-house book, you are currently shortest price to end up in prison at least once during the fortnight. What are you expecting or looking forward to, or know of what you are going to be doing?
Yeah, well, so I've done a little site visit, which I don't think Carlotta has yet, but I've been up there to this beautiful bar with 360-degree views. It goes all the way around this building. Views of Paris. We're right next to, somewhat next to Notre Dame, or what is left of Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. So beautiful views of that. But really, you can see, you can see the big old tower, you can see the big old arch, all those things that Paris for.
He's done his research, hasn't he, Carlotta?
And I also know that from experience that people who know Paris and love Paris think of it in arrondissement. We're in the 4th. Does that mean anything to you?
Not off the top of my head.
No, not me.
No.
But I'm sure it's lovely. So it's going to be a beautiful setting for hopefully some beautiful radio. We'll have to see.
All I really know at this juncture, Carlotta, and it is a mixed blessing, is that my accommodation is apparently literally a fancy apartment on the Boulevard Saint-Michel, which means I have, for about the last week since I was informed of this, been unconsciously humming "Where Do You Go To My Lovely" for almost every waking hour, and it's beginning to drive me round the twist.
Well, I'm starting to get to become really happy that neither of us is your flatmate for that duration of that period. Yes, we will have a big team in town, and it will rotate throughout the 2 weeks. The two of you will be there for the duration of the program. I will be passing the torch on to Laura Kramer at the beginning of the second week. And it really is an opportunity for us to take the temperature of the city. Now, we need to remember we have just opened our bureau as well in Paris. So this really is a moment in Monocle's calendar in terms of this being an important city for us, not only editorially, commercially, and for partners and readers. We have a big readership coming from France. Same with listeners. So it's an opportunity for us to, meet some of our listeners and readers face to face. If you are in town, feel free to drop us a line and come and watch one of our shows. That would be great. And yes, we will be as well having dispatches from several parts of the city. So it really will be a nice coverage, I think, trying to avoid a lot of the sports, considering that's not really our remit.
I don't want to avoid a lot of the sports. I'm massively into the sports. I enjoy the Olympics. My thing at the Olympics, David, this is my hot tip to get maximum enjoyment out of any Olympic Games, whether you're actually there or not, is almost at random. Look through the programmes, pick a sport you have never previously paid the least bit of attention to, or ideally know anything about, and get massively invested in it. Watch all of it. I think the last Olympics, I got way into sprint canoeing.
I have to say, rock climbing was a
amazing
revelation. That like
was
speed rock climbing, sprint rock climbing was incredible last Games. One of the other incredible things that you might actually see on the streets of the 4th, or even further, is one of our technological advancements that we're bringing to the Games.
Oh no, I hope those.
To Monocle Radio. We're going to have a proper roving reporter, as in on his cell phone or her cell phone or their cell phone.
This isn't going to be me, is it?
It could be. They will have their cell phone in their pocket. They will have a microphone in hand that says Monocle Radio on it, and they will be talking to the people on the streets of Paris. How do you like that?
What, interacting with the general public?
Yeah, what you love, right?
That's definitely not going to be me. Although, no, seriously though, Carlotta, I did want to pick up the point you were making earlier, which is that my theatrical curmudgeonliness aside, we are genuinely always delighted to hear from and or meet readers and listeners. If somebody does want to set that up, if they know they're going to be in Paris and they do want to come down and watch the show literally happen, whom should they contact?
You know what? I'll volunteer my inbox. You can email me at cr@monocle.com, and we would love to have people stop by. Maybe you have an interesting project as well for us to get you on the radio and talk to us in town alongside you, Andrew. Our other host will be Emma Nelson, who's already doing some research by spending a bit of holiday in the south of France.
That's very selfless of her.
Honestly, I'm so glad she got that gig. But yes, we'll have a big team in town, and it will be really exciting to have this mixture of us being in the studio, but then, as David was saying, using our latest bit of technology to be able to get dispatches from the different areas, from interviews on location as well, and to really understand what's going on. I, for one, am really excited with the media pack that came with the accreditation for the Paris Media Centre, and this is my official shout out to their very hardworking team, is that they recognise that journalists, it's a hard job to be a journalist. It's a even harder job to be a journalist covering a global event. So every day for 1 hour, there's a 10-minute slot where you can pre-book to get a back massage. So thank you very much, Paris Media Centre. Please accept all of my bookings.
Carlotta Rebello and David Stevens, thank you both. Sticking with semi-Olympic related news. One country which can expect a good deal of support at the upcoming games from the otherwise uncommitted is, for obvious reasons, Ukraine. During the last 2 years and a bit of its existential war, Ukraine has done its best to keep its considerable sporting tradition alive, although it hasn't always been easy. I spoke about this a short while ago to Monocle writer Julia Lassica. Well, Julia, let's start with the most recent international thing that many of our listeners will have seen Ukraine competing in, which was the European Football Championships. I think they were probably a lot of people's sentimental second favourite. Was it assiduously followed in Ukraine?
Yeah, definitely. I think Ukrainians actually quite big football fans. Some of my favourite memories from my childhood are going back for the summer and playing football on the streets with my friends. But yeah, they were. Of course, Ukraine didn't do super well, and we have had some batterings, especially from the English back in Euro 2021 or 2020. And obviously Ukraine didn't do super well this year, but there were these images circulating of soldiers sitting in trenches watching the team, really wishing them the best. So that was very, very heartwarming.
Because the thing we wanted to talk about was the wider picture of sports in Ukraine. And I think people who haven't had the experience of living in or visiting a country at war do tend to think of these places as an entirely binary thing, that if there is a war on, that must be the only thing everybody is doing at all times. And I guess you see that reflected occasionally now in those inane pictures people post of people out having a meal and a good time in Kiev, despite there being a war on. But of course, in any place at war, life does go on. And in Ukraine, over the last couple of years in particular, how easy or otherwise has it been for the country's sporting life to continue?
Yeah, so it's been a mixed picture. I think that one thing that is important to remember is sports requires time, it requires space to focus and to be able to dedicate yourself to what's going on, because it's all consuming. If you're in a country at war, then you have to contend with air raid alerts, and also bombing campaigns that are carried out in your cities. So that obviously gets in the way. But for Ukrainian, sport is so, so important. It's, for all countries, I guess there's the sort of hangover from the Soviet Union and we still see this with Russia and China, how much pressure they put on their teams. For the Ukrainian modern sports teams, it's a way of making Ukrainian presence felt on the world stage, but in a really positive way, in a very inspiring way, and showing how you can make a difference in a very kind of soft power, diplomatic kind of way. Obviously, there have been, and this is maybe something we can touch on, sports people who have left Ukraine who are now competing under other flags because they felt that the pressure is just too much inside the country. But there are many, many sports people, and in fact I did an interview with Jean Boleniuk, an MP in Ukraine's parliament, but also a champion Greco-Roman wrestler. And this was in the June issue of Monocle. And he was talking about how important it is to remain inside Ukraine, to carry on training despite all the alerts, despite all the pressure that's being put on him.
Is there much resentment of those people who stayed in Ukraine, especially those people who stayed in Ukraine to fight, of, I guess, relatively privileged sports people deciding this is all too difficult, I'm going somewhere else?
Well, I guess it depends on what you're talking about, because we do have representatives abroad. For example, Zinchenko, Monocle, who was a Ukrainian striker, I think still at Chelsea. I don't know if he's been kicked out yet. But anyway, he is, for example, a very important representative of Ukraine abroad. And I think people cheer on people like him. Or we have our tennis players who were at Wimbledon, for example. So I think it's really important for a morale boost for Ukrainians to see themselves kind of being represented abroad in a positive way, not just sort of being dragged around in political conversations as political pawns. But of course there is resentment for those who've sort of fled and decided they are going to say no, they don't want to recognise their Ukrainian identity. There's obviously that difficulty.
I mean, are there concerns, with all due recognition that obviously Ukraine has more urgent things to be concerned about the long-term effect of this, that those who have left might stay gone? I understand that this is a particular concern among chess, which I think we can count as a sport. It requires at least, or possibly even more mental focus, if not necessarily the same physical focus.
Definitely. Chess definitely is one of Ukraine's kind of pride and joys on the international stage. Yes, of course, you're referring to, there was this newspaper article published in one of Ukraine's leading papers today, which talked about how Ukraine is losing a generation of chess players. And that's absolutely true. There is this fear. It extends to all parts of Ukrainian life. It is a concerted effort on Russia's part to make Ukraine uninhabitable, to cut off electricity, to make sure that your day is so disrupted by air raid alerts, even if there are no bombing campaigns, that you can't do your job properly. It's all part of the effort to sort of wear away at the Ukrainian nation. And there is that fear in all sorts of things, especially for the young generation, for children. Their schooling has been so disrupted, first by COVID, when they had to sit online for so long, and now because in many schools, if there isn't a shelter downstairs in the basement, then they can't take the children into the school. They have to carry on online distance learning, or if they're in a village that is affected, on the front lines or near the front line zone. So this generation of youngsters, and also I guess the youngsters who've moved abroad and are now refugees, who will they compete for? Will they compete for Ukraine or for their home country, for their country that has become their home? So that is a very, very, very big fear, very much a problem for Ukrainians, yes.
I mean, we started out by talking about a recent international sporting event. There is, of course, another big international sporting event coming up, i.e. the Olympic Games in Paris. You're not coming with a lot of the radio station to Paris. You are going to Ukraine instead. How much more of a thing is it going to seem to Ukraine in its current situation, watching its athletes compete in the Olympics?
I think a really big deal. I think it's all part of, as I was saying, the sort of morale boost. And there are people who are really excited to see members of their community on the international stage. And I think that Ukrainians will have a very rare chance as well to talk about, or at least gesture towards the war, gesture towards the hardships that they have gone through in order to win that gold or silver or bronze medal or whatever, or to be at the competition itself. There are lots of people that we're really excited for. I recently was sent a video by an English friend of a Ukrainian rhythmic gymnast, Victoria Onoprienko, who will be in Paris. And it's actually on the Olympics YouTube channel, but it shows really vividly, very powerfully, her daily training schedule, how she goes in with her friends to the training camp, and then they have to go downstairs to the shelter when there's an air raid alert, then there are some explosions, then they go back upstairs. But every time it's like her focus is disrupted, and yet she's still so keen to go to the Olympics and to represent Ukraine.
Julia Lassica, thank you. This is the Monocle Daily with me, Andrew Muller, and finally on today's show, live music. Any listeners who have not previously acquainted themselves with Aoife O'Donovan's earlier records, with Crooked Still, her side project I'm With Her, or indeed her extensive solo catalogue, now have the soundtrack of a fine evening ahead of them. Aoife has more recently been touring with her latest album, All My Friends, a record inspired substantially by the extraordinary life and resonant works of the American suffragist Carrie Chapman Catt. Aoife visited Midori House during the UK leg of her tour. I began by asking about the figure at the centre of All My Friends.
Yes, she is one of the figures at the centre of this record. This record is all about the passage of the 19th Amendment. It was conceived of as a project that was supposed to coincide with the centenary of the 19th Amendment. 100 years had passed when I wrote this album. And when trying to decide what angle I was going to take in creating this music, I tried to look through the history books and find some people that were inspiring and find some ways to tell their story while also telling a more modern story. And Carrie Chapman Catt rose to the top of that list quickly because her words and her letters and her speeches just felt very timeless and also timely.
Was that given an additional unwelcome context, I guess, this project by the, well, not just the argument, but the fact that in the United States in particular there have been significant reversals in women's rights, reminders that ridiculously this stuff cannot be taken for granted?
All of this record was written sort of not with that in mind. And earlier today somebody was asking me about Roe v. Wade being overturned. That happened after I had already written the majority of this music. So while obviously women's rights are at the forefront of my mind all the time because I am a woman living in the world and I have a daughter, you don't ever want these rights to be taken away, rights that you definitely take for granted. I do also want to point out that the fight for suffrage was a long fight. It was going on for a long, long, long time and continues to really go on. I mean, gerrymandering still exists in the United States. There are ways that people are constantly trying to obstruct citizens from voting and trying to rig the system in whatever way they can. So I think that we have to really applaud the women who were so tirelessly fighting for this in the 19-teens, you know, against the backdrop of the Great War. There was the flu pandemic, 1918 flu pandemic. There was so much going on that they had to overcome to get these votes, to get this law passed. And I'm really grateful for that.
It struck me that there's several Eternals alluded to on this album. One is a figure who does appear in the song you're going to do for us, which is this man in West Virginia who Carrie Chapman Catt alludes to in a speech she gave in 1916. But he just seems emblematic of this bizarrely enduring figure of the male of the species who does have a fairly fundamental problem with women just doing stuff.
That's true. And I think that the way she puts it in the speech, and I'm so glad that you brought this up because I think sometimes when I'm singing this song, I feel like people are like, who are you talking about? What are you talking about? But first she references this man and she's sort of trying to say there's this whole group of people who say nay. There are the nay voters. And she brings up the man in West Virginia who says, well, we've been keeping women down so long, it would feel so queer to not. Like, why would we change what we're doing? But then the real moment in the song that's so heartbreaking is that Carrie says in her speech, and if someone asked his wife the same question, she would agree with him. And it's wild to think that there were women then and there are women now who don't believe that women should have the same rights. It's not just men who have been holding women back. And that's really the sad part about this, the nay voters, the women who are, and I sing about it elsewhere in the record, saying, you know, don't trust women. Like, we can't trust ourselves to make these big decisions. But of course we can, and we have to really believe in ourselves. And I think that's really one of the big points of this album.
When you make an album like this, though, is it just you sitting down thinking, this is a story I want to tell, these are sentiments I want to articulate? Or are you hoping that maybe this shifts the needle just a little bit? I know this is a question that gets asked of protest singers of all kinds, but is that a notion you cherish?
Absolutely. As an artist, I think I want the needle to be pushed, whether it's in a specific direction. I don't necessarily participate in that. I think the purpose of art is to provoke, inspire conversation, cause people to really have a big feeling that can either be a beautiful big feeling, a feeling of happiness, a feeling of joy, or a feeling of deep discomfort. And whatever people take away from this, I just want it to be something. I want people, and not just this music, but any music that I make. And that's how I want to feel when I listen to art, when I go to a museum and look at beautiful paintings, when I read a book. I want to feel something.
Let's get to the song you're going to do for us, which we have sort of alluded to, and it is kind of a summing up, if I'm hearing it right, of a speech that Carrie Chapman Catt gave in 1916.
Exactly, and the speech was actually entitled Crisis, and the song is Crisis, although I did try to sort of reimagine the text as if Carrie Chapman Catt were singing around a campfire in the 2020s, and, you know, gather round girls, let me tell you what's going on.
Let's hear it.
Let me tell you about the crisis that is here. At the end I almost see our final victory. I know that we don't all believe that it'll be what it'll be, but a crisis is indeed. like a boulder gathering speed. If we fail to act upon it, might mean the chance has been lost and we will have to wait to win. It's 1916, we're talking war and battle cries. Oh, women, dry your eyes, you gotta rise up and fight. You may be troubled and bewildered and stricken with grief, but you can solve it, fix these knotty problems, so you try to breathe. If we fail to act upon it, might mean the chance has been lost and we will have to wait to win. Oh, America, look up at that North Star. One day you'll come down. The time has come to shout aloud in every city and village and town. The woman's hour is struck. The woman's hour is now. If we fail to act upon it, might mean the chance has been lost. There was a man in West Virginia. Someone asked him what he thought. He said, we've been keeping women down so long, it would feel so queer to not. If someone asked his wife the same question, here's what she'd say: we've been down so long, we gotta stay this way. Therein lies the movement of those who say nay. Oh, America, look up, the star is getting nearer. It's time to shout aloud to everybody who can hear us. The woman's hour is struck. The woman's hour is now. The woman's hour is here. It's here.
That was Aoife O'Donovan. Aoife's fabulous new album, All My Friends, is out now. She is on tour at the moment. In fact, if you are listening to this in or near Groton, Massachusetts, and you're quick, you can catch her tonight at the Groton Hill Music Centre. She's in Brevard, North Carolina on the 23rd, and she's back in the UK for the Cambridge Folk Festival on the 27th. Other dates are available at her website. That is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Today's show was produced by Henry Rhys Sheridan and researched by Gunnar Gronlid and Sana Jumani. Our sound engineer was Sarah Nichol. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.